Hello and welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. We are about to embark on a deeply fascinating, empathetic, and frankly, a really eye-opening journey into the human mind. We're looking at a topic that gets thrown around in casual conversation all the time, yet is so rarely understood in its true, harrowing reality. We're talking about the pathology of obsession. Together, we're going to trace its historical roots, unpack the modern science, and clarify some pretty massive misconceptions along the way. Okay, let's dive right into this, because to truly understand obsession, we have to start with how it actually feels for the person experiencing it. The literature describes it as a morbid loss of freedom and a relentless pressure. I mean, just imagine your own mind being hijacked. A person suffering from intrusive obsessional thoughts might look completely fine on the outside, right? But beneath the surface, they're caught in this incredibly exhausting, draining loop. Their conscious mind remains totally lucid. They can reason perfectly well, but they are temporarily deprived of their actual freedom of thought. It's just an agonizing, invisible weight. Section 1. The relentless pressure of obsession. Now, the absolutely crucial words to focus on here are intrusive and unwanted. We aren't just talking about everyday worries about real-life problems. Not at all. These are images or urges that literally parasite on the mind. They generate intense unpleasure, unease, and this really strange feeling of the uncanny. And to deal with this horrific anxiety, the sufferer feels driven, almost compelled, to perform repetitive behaviors or mental acts. They're forced into these exhausting rituals like, say, washing their hands until the skin is practically raw, or silently repeating specific mantras just to cope and try to neutralize that fear. You know, the specific themes of these obsessions can vary wildly from person to person. Some people are absolutely tormented by a fear of contamination, which can lead to hours spent in the shower. Others are obsessed with symmetry, constantly chasing this fleeting feeling that things are just right. Some suffer in deep shame and secrecy with forbidding, taboo, or even aggressive thoughts, absolutely terrified they might actually act on them. And then there's incompleteness, this pathological doubt where they feel they literally must check locks or appliances dozens of times. But regardless of the specific dimension, the result is always the same. It's a tragic, exhausting attempt to control the uncontrollable. Moving on to Section 2, Freud and the false connection. So historically speaking, early psychiatrists kind of struggled with what to do with these symptoms. Back in the 18th and 19th centuries, figures like Beard and Janet threw around vague terms like morbid fears or tied the whole thing to hereditary degeneracy and depressive psychoneurosis. But a major paradigm shift happened in 1894. Sigmund Freud published a groundbreaking text, completely breaking away from the idea of innate mental weakness. He proposed that these obsessions were actually a highly complex defense mechanism driven by an internal intrapsychic conflict. Which leads us to a fundamental and honestly agonizing question for the sufferer. Why do we fear what we know is harmless? I mean, the person checking the stove for the 40th time knows, logically, the stove is off. So why the intense, uncontrollable panic? And this brilliantly illustrates Freud's theory of the false connection. Freud theorized that a person experiences a trauma or an incompatible idea, often way back in early childhood, that carries a massive amount of emotional weight, like severe guilt or self-reproach. The mind actually represses the memory itself, but all that intense emotional energy, well, it needs somewhere to go. So it gets displaced. It attaches itself to a totally insignificant, meaningless representation in the present. Suddenly, that harmless idea becomes inexplicably compulsive, purely because it's carrying the hidden emotional weight of something entirely different. Section 3. Ambivalence in Childhood Origins. Freud actually dug deeper into this in his famous 1909 case study, widely known as the Rat Man. He identified that the core of obsessional functioning is a profound ambivalence. It's essentially a massive battle between intense affection and unconscious hostility toward a loved one. In the obsessional mind, hate actually precedes love developmentally. So to protect the loved person from this underlying hostility, the mind builds a fortress. It develops a rigid, strict supermorality. Those endless doubts and circular rituals, That's just the mind's exhausting struggle to keep these conflicting impulses separated. Freud's original concept of Abwehr, or defense, laid the groundwork for an absolutely incredible proposition later made by psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott. Winnicott suggested that the fear of a breakdown that drives these obsessions is actually based on a trauma or breakdown that has already happened. Think about that for a second. The obsessive ritual is a desperate, pathological adaptation trying to control something in the past that already went wrong. They are literally trying to prevent a disaster that is already behind them. Let's pivot a bit for Section 4, Modern Neurobiology of OCD. Let's move to the present and see how this builds when we contrast those foundational psychoanalytic theories with modern biomedical science. Today, we see a much broader picture. We know the pathogenesis of OCD is a highly complex, interconnected web of genetics, environment, and neurobiology. We've moved beyond just looking at the mind's psychological defenses to literally scanning the brain's circuitry. We now know for sure that OCD involves major disruptions in the serotonin system, as well as glutamate and dopamine. It's like a giant puzzle where vulnerabilities in our genes interact with environmental stressors to physically modify how the brain functions. And this biological reality caused a massive shift in how the medical community classifies the disorder. In both the DSM-5 and the upcoming ICD-11, OCD was actually removed entirely from the anxiety disorders chapter. Why? Because the evidence shows that while, yes, anxiety is absolutely present, the disorder is primarily driven by dysfunctions in compulsivity and habit loop regulation within specific neurocircuits. Fundamentally, it's a structural problem of actions becoming rigid and automatic. Section 5. OCD versus OCPD. So the crucial point here, and this is something that gets confused all the time in popular culture, is the distinction between OCD and OCPD. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is ego-dystonic. That means the sufferer hates their symptoms. The thoughts are unwanted, highly distressing, and completely inconsistent with who they are as a person. They often hide them out of deep shame. On the flip side, OCPD, or obsessive compulsive personality disorder, is ego-syntonic. People with OCPD view their rigid rules, extreme perfectionism, and need for control as totally rational, correct, and highly desirable. They don't have those horrific, intrusive images. Instead, they have a pervasive, lifelong personality structure built around absolute order. When we put them side by side, the differences are just stark. In terms of insight, an OCD sufferer almost always knows their compulsions are irrational. And that awareness often leads them to eventually seek help, even if it tragically takes about 11 years on average. An OCPD individual, however, firmly believes their way is the literal only correct way to do things, making them highly resistant to change. While OCD is driven by acute, overwhelming anxiety and distress, OCPD is driven by this deep, unyielding need to control environments and people. Ultimately, OCD traps the individual in time-consuming, debilitating rituals, whereas OCPD tends to alienate coworkers and loved ones because the person demands everyone adhere to their completely impossible standards. And finally, Section 6, the exhausting search for control. The reality for someone living with OCPD, or honestly for those who live and work alongside them, is this agonizing environment where absolutely nothing is ever perfect enough. Their extreme conscientiousness means they can become so intensely obsessed with the tiny, trivial details of a project that they completely miss the actual deadline. They hold a dichotomous black and white view of morality, and they absolutely cannot delegate tasks because they fundamentally believe no one else can do it right. As you can imagine, it is an incredibly isolated, frustrating way to live. When we pull all these threads together, from Freud's rat man and childhood ambivalence to the modern neurobiological habit loops, right through to the debilitating rituals of OCD and the strict micromanagement of OCPD, it all points to one unified, tragic theme. Obsession, in all its various forms, is a desperate psychological attempt to assert control over a reality that feels profoundly unmanageable. It's a self-defeating pursuit, trying to build an impenetrable fortress of certainty in an uncertain world. Which leaves us with this final thought to reflect upon. We all like structure, right? We all like a little bit of order in our daily lives. But when does our very human desire for perfect order cross that fine line? At what point does the pursuit of absolute control turn into the absolute destruction of the self? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I really hope it brought some vital clarity to a truly complex and misunderstood condition. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.
Until then, take care.